Hello everyone, dear hackers. In the last lesson, we finally started manipulating the markup. I didn't call this lesson page hacking for nothing. Although I received many comments, this is not hacking, this is not hacking. But you know, as I say, without such commentators, this world would be dull and gray. Therefore, I can afford to use such metaphorical names. What would I like to motivate you with in the upcoming lessons, including today's? Look, if all the material we cover on DOM manipulation and everything else in pure JavaScript, by the time we move on to studying frameworks like React or Angular, I don't know yet which one we'll choose, I'll hold a vote. Working with frameworks will seem like a fairy tale after pure JavaScript. That's exactly why you need to study the basics to understand how it works under the hood. A framework will simplify your life so much that you'll be on cloud 9 when we start studying frameworks. So right now, this is like heavy metal, a heavy JavaScript foundation. Think of it that way. Although I see that many people really liked it, which is very cool nonetheless. And one more thing, in just a couple of JavaScript lessons, I will insert another lesson with an additional theory supplement, because the very first JavaScript lesson was entirely dedicated to theory along with visual examples. And in about 2 lessons, I will create another such lesson, because there are already fundamentals that we are approaching and they need to be known. Many of these fundamentals I was learned firsthand later on when I was already on dots working, and over the years they were pointed out to me repeatedly. And I will tell you these basics very concisely and briefly so that you are already aware of them. I will talk about how JavaScript works, what is under the hood of JavaScript, what shortcomings it has, and what you need to pay attention to. This will help you in the future to pass interviews and avoid additional unnecessary, unexpected errors. For now, let's continue developing our application, our website. Let's go. Alright guys, in the last lesson we created our first post generated by JavaScript. First, let's open Live Preview. For those who haven't installed Live Preview yet or opened this lesson first without watching the previous ones, I've included how to download this extension because we specifically use this one as it suits us best. Ctrl-Shift-P or Command-Stop to unpack, Shift-P. I repeat this in every lesson because I assume that someone might open this specific lesson and start coding right from here. I allow for such moments, so I repeat it. Also, I suggest starting fresh or with JavaScript basics if you don't want to do HTML and CSS. That's also an option. Better to start from the beginning. Look, we've generated such a beautiful post, a complete post. And now we need to remember, I told you that eventually how applications work, whether it's iOS, Android, or web applications. All the information is stored on the server and we make an HTTP request. The HTTP request sends us a response and this response contains all the information. We then render this information on the UI, on the front end. So let's simulate a situation as if we received a response from the server and we need to render a list of such posts. At the very beginning of the document, I will create a response with such variables, a block called response. Oh, sorry. My microphone is slightly covering the keyboard, but const. Chatep response. For those who don't know why I, for example, write const instead of let, watch the previous lessons. For those who don't know what an array is, which I opened, watch the first lesson on JavaScript basics, you'll find out. And now let's refer to our post. What does each of our posts contain? It contains a title and it contains a description. Accordingly, each post must have a title and a description. For this, we insert the first object into the array, which will contain the title. For now, I will create them empty and the description. Let's say we want to create 4 posts like we did when we were learning HTML and CSS. Accordingly, inside the array, we should have 4 such objects. This is how we receive responses from the server in approximately the same format. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll label it as HTTP response. This is called JSON format. JavaScript can work with JSON by default, meaning it doesn't need to be parsed separately. When a response comes from the server, it is already parsed and arrives in this form. What parsing is, we'll cover later, so don't pay attention to it for now. Roughly speaking, this is the format in which the response will come to you. To help you understand what this is, I will now log into my Instagram page. So what's next? Here we are on my page. By the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because my Instagram is just stuck. No subscriptions. unlike YouTube and other social networks. So yes, let's see what responses we get. Here, you could spend a lot of time analyzing all of this. There's also the GraphQL protocol used somewhere here. In general, you understood everything we need here for the UI config, or to render these posts. Everything comes in exactly this format. So you can play around with the sites yourself, open them and take a look. Well, this seems to be the config for the actual posts. Yes, you see all the info is here. Well, this looks like either stories or posts. I'm not exactly sure. But here specifically, when we view stories on Instagram, a list comes up showing who viewed those stories accordingly. Yes, when we open stories on Instagram, we can view the list of who watched the stories. They appear here in such an object. Here on the right is the username. And so all the information about the users who viewed the stories comes directly here. All of this naturally is rendered on the UI. That's it, stop here. Here, let's move on. We have drawn 4 posts. Let's copy from here. Here, we'll make GTA 6 leaks. Here, GTA 6 fresh. Updates. This is like the title of the post, the heading. GTA 6 release date. I prepared the description. I'll write the same thing everywhere for now. Here it is, you see, in a long string like this, so as not to take up much time. That's all. Look, this is the kind of HTTP response we received from the server. And what do we need to do? We need to render it. In the future, we will make real HTTP requests. For now, this is called mocks, mock data. Kind of a simulation. So first, we need to remove all of this. I'll comment out the append to container. Totem. Remember, in the first lesson on the basics, we went over what loops are. Now, loops will come in handy. The simplest loop is for each. We need to go through all these objects, each one individually, and render it. For each. Next, we need to access the item. You can write either item or post. It's up to you. Whichever is more convenient for you to read. I'll write post to make it clear. This means it's a reference to each element of the post array. Next, look, in the previous lesson, we created a virtual DOM, virtually created HTML elements. Accordingly, we need to do the same thing here. For the add post, for example, I'll write add post here. First, we need to create a div element. From here, I will go step by step. I won't copy paste everything, so you can understand what I'm doing. First, we create our div for our post. Then we create the title. Then we create the description. Everything we need. All right, I'll remove this here. I'll add the class later. Let's move on. Look, here's the most important thing. We have title for the post. Now we need to add these titles here. What do we do? DOM post title dot inner text equals post dot title. Because surely you've already understood that each post dot title contains a title and a description. That is, the post contains a title and a description. Next, we need to add a virtual element. To the description, we need to add the description. So we are now virtually creating elements post dot description. All done, created. Now each post has a title and a description. And what do we need to do next? We need to insert it into the parent mobile element. Here we have it. We accessed it together. I'll remove this now. Here's our parent container into which we insert all the posts. Here it is, roughly speaking, conditionally. And we need to insert the post container into each of these containers. So this is done in a loop now, but before that, I forgot to do something. Before that, we naturally need to insert into the DOM post container. This is the container for each post, I remind you. For each post, we need to insert these title and heading. First, we set the title. You see, we inserted the title into the post container. From here, we remove it and need to insert the description. Add title and description to post. I'm writing it down. Set title to h2. Set This is literally dumb. Okay, that's all. We, roughly speaking, are in our virtual post, which is like here, you see? Here, roughly speaking, is the post. Here is our post. And we inserted h2 and inserted p into this virtual post. This is our virtual post. We also need to add a theme to it, light theme, JavaScript. For this, we already have a selector too. It's a CSS property. Well, it's probably better to add the class right at the creation stage. When we created all the elements, you can immediately add CSS styles here. I'm copying it already because we covered all this in the previous lesson. So you can also copy it yourself. Look, we add a class to each of our posts here. That's it. We added the class, added the title. In the post container, we added the title, added the description. And now here we successfully add each one to our main root container, the DOM post container. That is, we created a container separately for each item inside the array, and we will add each container separately to our root, meaning this container. Something is not right with it. If something doesn't seem right, we always open DevTools, and here it tells us DOM post title is not defined. DOM post title. What is that? And do you know why this error occurs? Because, well, I didn't delete the old element. These old elements, to make everything work, they must be deleted. From here, when we set it, you see, because we moved the const post title here, these elements will indicate that they are not defined, undefined. All right, got it. Look, we have 4 posts. What don't I like? Let's add to them. Let's do this not through CSS, but let's do it through JavaScript. I would, of course, prefer to do this through CSS, but purely for experimental purposes. So we need our DOM post container. Access its styles. And we need to set a margin, not padding, but margin. Bottom. So there's a space below. Let's make it 10 pixels. You see, we gave it 10 pixels using JavaScript. What's the point? Fortunately for us, at least on the web, there's CSS. So you can write everything in the main style in CSS, but mainly in Swift, Android, you have to manually write everything in the main style, just like I did here in JavaScript. You need to write all styles imperatively right in the code. So we're lucky here. That's it. So what flow did we just fully go through? In pure JavaScript, we received the server response, as I showed you with the Instagram example, and we rendered it in our UI. So that's the beauty of it. Look, I want to do the same thing to show you using a classic for loop how this can be done. Look, I won't go into detail now. I'll just add here how to do the same thing, but with other for loops, regular, classic, and for of, because we covered this in the basics. And now I'll just insert it into the code. And for better understanding, we should wrap it in a function. Function init post. Okay. So command KF formatted it for me. In short, to format the code, you need to select it and press command, or control KF, or select the text and right click to format selection with. For example, I use the TypeScript formatter. Okay. You see, since we wrap the function, our JavaScript, its cycle in which it operates, doesn't know anything about the internals, because functions by default are not called. Functions need to be called. Look, call functions. I will call this function. Look, there you go, the function is called. Now I will rewind all of this. How will I do it? Init posts for loop. A separate function and another function. This is purely, for example, for of loop. So you understand. Now we will do all of this in rewind. So look, in the for loop, since we don't have access to our post element, like we did in for each, we naturally go through everything, but we have the index of each element. So we simply replace post with hotTip response, and insert and here. That is, this is the index of each element. That is, the for loop gives us the same thing. 0 element, 1, 2, 3, and it goes through the indices. Therefore, we simply call http response, and the index is given, and we refer to the index. The same way we would refer to HTTP response without a loop, selecting its 0 element, first, second, third. In the loop, we automatically iterate. Format selection with TypeScript, code formatter. All done. Formatted everything to make it look nice. We made a for loop. Next for of. The for of loop is similar to for each as it lets us access the post directly without an index. Why is the classic for loop important? Because there are cases when we specifically need access to the index. When we need to perform some manipulations inside, this is important. So, let's test if it works the same way. Now I will comment out init post for loop. Something didn't work. Init post for loop. Now let's see where I made a mistake. Mistakes are important because they show us where we missed something. Because I wrote const here instead of let. Do you know why? Look, here's what the mistake is. This is a very important point. They might even ask about this in interviews. Remember, I said that const cannot be reassigned. Therefore, if we write const here and const cannot be overwritten, it remains equal to 0. That is, const does not increase. We cannot increment it. Increment the post. Here I is incremented upwards. Well, relative to the number of our elements. Therefore, since const does not grow, since it is not overwritten, our posts are not generated further. That's why you need to write let here. That's the mistake. See, even experienced people make mistakes. But the most important thing is to understand why this mistake happened. That is, you saw that I literally understood or saw what was wrong in 2 seconds. Plus, I'm used to writing consts everywhere, so yes, everything works through the for loop. And now init. I could be embarrassed by the mistakes and cut this out of the video, but no, on the contrary, I will make mistakes so you can see. Oh, how many mistakes you will face, how much bug hunting awaits you. Everything on for of also works. I will attach all this to the lesson as a template for you. I like to make a double space between functions, 1, 2, so. Well, dear hackers, today we got even closer to the basics, because today I at least showed you the simulation of HTTP requests and how they actually work with real examples, using Instagram as an example. Accordingly, we are getting closer and closer, and right now what we have done is roughly the same. As what happens when you use Android or iOS, it doesn't matter. Therefore, this is a very deep foundation, in fact. But when we move on to frameworks, the frameworks will seem like a fairy tale to you because everything has been done there in a cool way, eliminating the drawbacks of JavaScript and simplifying rendering in loops as much as possible. In loops, we won't have to render anything ourselves. Everything will be rendered for us. So it will be very interesting. Comment if you've watched this far. Picupune and tell us if you prefer Angular or React. If not, read, watch, and learn. So these words aren't scary. I hope you now understand the purpose of the theory in the first JavaScript basics lesson. The thing is, in this lesson, if you noticed, we wrote everything haphazardly in one file. This is how it's mostly taught in other lessons and the mistakes beginners make. In our lessons, I will dedicate the next lesson specifically to show how to break this file into a modular structure and use native JavaScript modules. That is, this is already quite a medium level, let's say, not professional, but medium level on how to properly but thoroughly structure a project. JavaScript, hacker level project. And of course, in the description, you can find this code in the sandbox from where you can copy it to yourself, take a look, play around, or even fork this code to make a copy. And of course, join the Telegram hacker base. Every week, I provide something new, something exclusive there. I've already answered some very important questions. I introduced terms like from IT and beyond, which won't intimidate you when building your career. Because I had to go through fire and water to learn all this, ending up in awkward situations when you've been working for quite a while but aren't aware. And I provide all of this in the hacker base on Telegram, sharing all my experience by default. So if you join the hacker base and subscribe, success is guaranteed. This was Discipromax from the hacker base. See you in the next lesson. Adio!